Today we are talking about block of the month patterns, or BOMs. These are really, really cool kind of, I would say almost like community-based patterns where it's more than just, making a quilt. It's something that you do with kind of friends and grow this community around. They're really, really fun. So we're going to talk about kind of all of the basics around block of the month patterns, how to write them, kind of some best practices, all the good stuff. So first of all, what the heck is a BOM pattern? Basically, it's just a pattern that's doled out incrementally, usually monthly, hence block of the month, but it doesn't have to be. It could be weekly, it could be bi-weekly. I've seen lots of different ways that this is done. Traditionally, it's like a sampler quilt that you get one block each month, and then at the end of the year, you've got this whole pattern that you've made. But I am a really huge fan of like a Christmas block of the month. I think they're really, really cool. They're not monthly, right? Maybe you do it for the 12 weeks leading up to Christmas, and it's this really fun way to kind of get into the holiday spirit. And at the end, you've got this beautiful seasonal quilt decoration that you can put in your home for the holiday season. They're really, really fun. Again, a lot of times there's kind of a community around the people that are participating in the block of the month. And so you get to know different quilters and see the projects they're making on and get inspired. It's like a really fun process. But the basic premise is that you've got a pattern, a single pattern project that is broken up into these kinds of increments that are doled out on some interval. Each increment's going to be different, so you're not just making the same block once a month for 12 months. That is not the goal here, right? You want to have lots of variety. It can be kind of a mystery quilt, or it can be a known. So you can have a picture of the quilt that you're making, and you know that you're going to end up with this quilt at the end of the year, or it can be a complete mystery. It can just be, you're going to get all of these clues each month, and you don't quite know what you're making, and then there's this big reveal at the end, which is kind of fun too. Now, there's lots of different flavors for these. I would say the most traditional is something like you see over here. This is the Sweet Potatoes Block of the Month pattern for 2024, and it is very traditional. It's 12 different blocks, one per month, and then you kind of lay it out into this kind of sampler grid with a sashing. This is like the typical block of the month pattern, right? Gorgeous, all the same. These are modern blocks. They're super intricate. I love it. It's a gorgeous pattern, but this is definitely like a traditional block of the month pattern, I would say. There are other options. So row quilts are becoming very, very popular lately. And this is where basically each month you're going to create a row of pattern that you're going to put together. This is the Vesta quilt by Julie Wax Designs. Absolutely amazing. This is like an FPP applique masterpiece. Super, super intricate, but absolutely gorgeous. I love it. And if you look closer, you can kind of see that these are actually blocks on point that are making up the individual rows. So not a traditional row quilt, but all the same. You would have each month where you're making kind of the same block repeatedly in order to build up these rows together. A more traditional row quilt looks something like this. This is Conversation by Anne-Marie Cheney. And what you can see is that each month you're making a series of blocks in a bunch of different colors in order to end up with this kind of ombre effect at the end. And these are just kind of traditional rectangular rows that you just kind of sew together successively at the end in order to end up with this beautiful intricate quilt. But there's a bunch of different flavors for these BOM patterns. It doesn't have to be blocks or rows. It can also be kind of, I've seen lots of medallion style quilts, even like Lone Star style quilts done as block of the month. So that's totally fine. It's kind of sky's the limit here. Anything you can dream up. But the point is that each month you're making something different, generally with different techniques. And at the end, you have this kind of beautiful, intricate project that's made over the course of a year or 3 months or whatever the interval happens to be. So the requirements for a block of the month, as I see it, this is what seems to work well from my experience. Each clue or pattern, like each monthly increment pattern, must be standalone. You don't want to be referring back to techniques in previous sections of the pattern so that they only have one pattern in front of them working at a time. They're not having to like flip back through 6 months of patterns and then take a risk of getting them mixed up, which is not ideal. So if you're using techniques like HSTs or QSTs where you're using them in multiple elements, you're going to want to repeat the instructions for those in each individual increment, rather than just saying, refer back to, pattern 1 for the instructions for this stuff. Each increment pattern has to be a standalone pattern, in my opinion. You're also going to want to give fabric and supply requirements at the beginning. This is really important. Again, the point of this is to make a finished quilt. Yes, there are some really super beautiful, scrappy block of the month patterns out there, but as a rule, most people tend to be a little bit afraid of scrappy, especially when they're trying to make like one big cohesive quilt, especially if it's a mystery quilt. You don't really know how it ends up at the end. So it's really important at the beginning of this thing to provide your customers with estimates for fabric, any other supplies that are needed. So if you need a specialty ruler or I've seen some of these things that have like, our Christmas Advent kind of type calendar wall hangings, and you need like string or a little bit of batting here and there, polyfill stuffing, right? Like any kinds of those supplies, you're going to want to make sure that's listed on the front end. So these fabric requirements can be either yardage, that's the easiest way to do it, right? Or you could be, groupings of fat quarters. If you're doing a Christmas style block of the month pattern and you need, tree fabrics and 6 fat quarters for, stars and 6 fat quarters for stockings, right? Like you can kind of give those different categories and quantities associated with them, even if they're not exact. Even if it's a mystery quilt, you still need to give some of that information so that people can kind of plan their projects accordingly. This is also really important if you plan on selling your block of the month pattern to a quilt shop as a quilt kit, because they need to know what to include in the quilt kit, whether that's monthly or at the beginning. They need to know what to budget for and how to stock their fabrics in order to make sure that all of the people that buy the block of the month kit have everything they need at the end. You don't want to end up short. You also really need to make sure that you distribute the workload evenly. So you don't want to have, 15 blocks in the first 2 patterns, and then you're making 2 blocks in the next 6 patterns, right? And it just becomes really uneven. Try to make sure that you've distributed the workloads evenly between each increment so that there's kind of the same amount of work that is reasonable for the time period given for the project in each incremental installment. So if it's a block of the month, you need to make sure that the stuff for that month is manageable in a month and that the amount of work is fairly consistent month to month. If that's not entirely possible, you can kind of balance it out. So if you've got a heavier month, follow that up with a lighter month. So if they get a little bit behind, they've got time to catch up before it just kind of snowballs out of control and they're so far behind that they're not even interested in finishing the project anymore. Avoid that at all costs. So those are the basic requirements. Let's talk about some recommendations, some best practices that I've seen working well in the clients that I work with. So the first thing is to cut all the pieces needed for each month rather than doing it all at the beginning of the quilt. If this is a 12-month project, keeping track of all of those pieces for 12 months in a sewing room is like a nightmare, right? It's really hard. So don't cut more than you need for each month. So while you've got fabric requirements and all of that good stuff at the beginning, in January, if it's a block of the month, you don't want to have the cutting instructions there as well. Cut what you need for each month at the beginning of that month and not anything else. This is good for a couple of reasons. First, a lot of quilters don't like just sitting down and doing a crap ton of cutting. Generally speaking, there are exceptions, but generally cutting is not the favorite part of the quilting process for most quilters. So kind of parse it out so that you've got it spread out throughout the project if you can. And then, like I said, it also helps you keep track of all of these pieces, reduce the risk of something getting lost. If you're doing something like strip piecing that is spanning over multiple months or installments, that's okay, but try to minimize it as much as you can. So if you've got a strip set that you're going to use a little bit in month 3 and a little bit in month 6, that's okay, but just make sure in month 3 you say, hey, set this aside, don't throw it away, we're going to use this again in month 6. Something along those lines. You also want to make sure that you've got kind of the total project organized by something. Don't just kind of randomly distribute everything through 12 months. Some ways to organize these projects are by skill. So start easiest and get harder as you go. So it's kind of this skill progression that you're learning along the way. That serves a couple purposes. It makes it not so overwhelming at the beginning, and it also kind of can be useful if it's like a sampler quilt, a skill builder quilt, that you can kind of market it as this project that you're going to learn all of these cool skills with and become a better quilter by the end of the year. You could also do it by theme. So if you've got, a 12-month pattern where in January you're doing like snowflakes and things like that, and then in summer you've got, sunshine and beaches and things like that, you could organize it by theme, so that you've got kind of each of the themes matching up with the time of year that they're going to actually be sewing these things in. I'd say that's less common, but that is one of the options. And then if it's a row quilt, like we talked about, you could just go in order, right? Row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4. My personal favorite is the skill method, again, because a lot of these patterns tend to be fairly intricate. That's the common thread for most block of the months, which we'll talk about in a minute. But when you have more complicated patterns, it's really nice to kind of have this skill progression so that you're kind of working up to these harder techniques instead of just kind of jumping around from easy to hard and easy to hard. Another recommendation is to mix up the techniques you're using. So if you've got HSTs in 6 of the blocks, why not use different techniques for each one of those things? So again, you're exposing your reader, your customer, to more techniques, kind of flexing different muscles. Keeps the block of the month more interesting. And also you can kind of market it as this skill builder quilt series. The last recommendation, which I've already kind of alluded to, is to not be afraid to get intricate, right? These are patterns that you're going to work on over a span of time, usually 12 months. That's a long time, a whole year, right? So this is your chance to kind of go a little bit more in depth, a little bit more involved than you would for a typical pattern that's meant to be kind of like a quick project that you can sew in a month or two. A lot of times with kind of standalone patterns, we shy away from that because you just don't want it to be too involved. It gets to be too much for an individual quilter, but block of the month patterns are exactly that, right? Like this is something that you're going to sit with for a year because you've fallen in love with it and it becomes this whole event that you work through in community with other quilters. There's usually like a sharing page, different kinds of things like that that are really fun for block of the months, or even if you're just sharing kind of with a hashtag on social media, you can see what other people are working on. And so this is a really great opportunity to get more intricate with your design, more intricate with your cutting than you ever have. That's actually kind of the point of a block of the month. Now, I will say that I've kind of seen increasing popularity for these kinds of projects lately. A lot of quilt shops really love block of the months because it's an opportunity for them to sell a kit with a pattern, right? If you can provide them with a beautiful block of the month pattern that they can put together this whole array of different colorways and kits and really have fun with it, and then market it to their customers over a 12-month period to get those repeat customers, this is a really popular way to do that. And so if you're ever thinking about a block of the month pattern, you're interested in doing that, definitely think a little harder about it. Don't just kind of set that project aside. These can be really lucrative projects. A lot of people are interested in them because fabric's getting more and more expensive, right? And so projects that we can sit with for longer, that take longer to complete, that are a little bit more involved are really welcomed right now with the current economic climate. So definitely start thinking about whether or not you want to do a block of the month pattern for 2025. This is the time to think about it because if you're going to be starting January 1st, you kind of need to have your patterns together before kind of middle of December, I would say. And that means like tested, ticketed, all of that good stuff. So you've got 3 months to the end of the year. Start thinking about it now because this can be a really lucrative addition to your business.